Welcome in, everybody, to episode 45 of the
We're
Seven
back.
Figures or Bust podcast. I am Christian Brindle. I'm joined with your co-host, ladies and gentlemen, Glen Shelton. And ladies and gentlemen, we have a jam-packed show for you today. We're going to be talking about the FCC, ladies and gentlemen. Man, do we got a lot to talk about with this topic. First off, I wanted to just super quickly address that we did not do a show yesterday, Glenn. We did not end up doing a show for the people. Quickly wanted to address that, right? First off, apologize to the audience. I am sorry. I take full responsibility for this.
Say it like you mean it.
I take full responsibility. Crazy situation happened. So over the weekend, I'm checking one of my personal bank account that my mortgage payment comes out of, several other, bills here and there, something I don't look at more than a couple of times a week. And I noticed that there was a check that was cashed from that account. And for anyone that knows me, I don't write checks. I'm not an old man. I don't do it.
He's an old man. That's not true.
And the check amount was for $7,100.00. And I thought, that looks odd. And so notice this later in the day on Sunday. My credit union didn't open until Monday morning. And it dawned on me that I might have been a victim of fraudulent activities.
Yes.
Which
very much so.
Which we came to find out I was. So between, filing a police report, working things out with the bank, just trying to getting all that situated, that was a bit of an urgent thing, that needed to be kind of taken care of. So I apologize that we did not do this episode yesterday, but we're back today. Super excited. Episode 45. And man, Glenn, we have a juicy topic for the people today.
We got a big one, you guys. Before we get into that, did you ever do the marshmallow test with Violet?
I did indeed do the marshmallow test.
I'm here for the data. I did it as well with my youngest.
Okay, so
who's 4? So yeah, you go first. Let's hear this.
I ordered a big bag of like fat marshmallows, like this big.
The big one, yeah.
And so I pull 2 out of the bag. I sit her down at the dining room table, and I tell her, I'm like, all right, Violet, here's the deal. I'm going to put this marshmallow on this plate. And before I can finish, she's like, and Violet's going to eat it? And I'm like, this is not starting well. I'm like, listen. I'm like, I like 4 or 5 times. And I'm like, here's the deal. I'm like, if I'm going to put this on the plate, me and Mommy are going to leave the room for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't eat the marshmallow, then I will come back and give you a second marshmallow. And you can have both. She's like, Violet, eat both? I'm like, for fuck's sake. I'm like, so we leave. After about 45 seconds, she gets up out of the chair and comes to find us. And we're like, no, go back and sit down with the marshmallow. So then she goes back, sits down for another 30 seconds or so. And then it's silent. And then all of a sudden we hear this. So we come back to half of the marshmallow. She failed the test.
That's good. That's good data. That's good data from a science experiment. Did you and your wife bet on what you thought would happen before?
My wife was fully convinced from the very moment I told her about the experiment that she was like, there's no way she's not going to eat it. Like, she will eat it within 60 seconds. So we didn't end up betting because I didn't feel good about my chances.
Yeah, I bet. So I did it with my youngest. He's 4. And I thought for sure he would not make it 5 minutes because he's a fiend for sugar. Just anything, chocolate, sugar, Rice Krispie treats, cookies, anything he can get his hands on at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So I was definitely, my wife believed that he would make it, which I thought, okay, I think I've got this one. I was using the small marshmallows though. Maybe the bigger marshmallows would have been more enticing, but he did make it. And there's another part of the test I forgot to mention, but so I did the same thing. Set the marshmallow down. Said, Fitz, 5 minutes. If you don't eat this, when I get back, you'll get another one. And he said, okay. 5 minutes. He's like, where's my marshmallow? He's like demanding it. He's like, so then I give him.
But he made it.
He made it. But hang on. So there's another part of the test I forgot to tell you.
Okay.
So in the second one, I said, if you don't eat either of these, you're supposed to keep going to see. So
Okay.
if you eat either of these, I will give you another marshmallow in 5 minutes. He looked at me like I was crazy and stuffed the 2 marshmallows. So there was a limit, even though he did make it. There was a limit to that delayed gratification. There was some success, but the next step, he was out. He was like, no. He's like, I'm eating these 2 right now. I waited 5 minutes. No way I'm waiting another minute.
I'd be curious to try it again with smaller marshmallows. Maybe that big marshmallow was like, because she didn't even finish the entire big marshmallow. She ate like maybe 2/3 of it. So in her mind, I'm wondering if she was thinking
The size
I couldn't eat 2 anyway. I'm just taking mine now.
could be.
I don't know if she's that
Could be.
strategic. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe she is. I think she's fairly calculated.
it might be.
But yes, yeah. Man, I might have to try it again with smaller marshmallows and report back because but it was a fascinating, fun little experiment. We had fun with it.
If you guys were listening to this and you're like, what the hell are they talking about? The last pod we did last Thursday, we talked a lot about delayed gratification, and this was something that came up was the marshmallow test. Something that they'll do with kids. Again, it's kind of a test to see, can you handle this delayed gratification and at a very small scale? Here's a marshmallow. If you wait, you can get 2. That's what we experience as business owners, right? As investors, you can spend that money now, or you can wait 5 years and it might be worth double, if you invest it right. So just to catch everyone up to speed. Now, before we get into today's main topic, I do want to mention the sponsor of today's episode is Lead Heroes. So today's episode is brought to you by Lead Heroes, the #1 senior insurance lead provider. And I want to explain what we have going on today because it expires at midnight tonight. So this is a very limited time offer. You've got about 16 hours from the moment I'm saying these words until the price of our Turning 65 leads will be going back up. We have exclusive, double verified Turning 65 leads. We are targeting seniors who are 2 to 5 months out from their 65th birthday. They go through our process. They opt in online. We call them to confirm that they are interested, that they want to speak with you. And then we're passing that person along. So again, when you look at all the different leads out there on the market, a double opt-in, double verified lead like this is some of the highest quality. You don't have to take my word for it. You can search right here in the 7-Figure Medicare Agent Facebook group and see tons of agents who've had success with these Turning 65 leads. So do not wait. Almost 50% off the normal retail price. It will go back up at midnight tonight. So take advantage of this discount while you still can. That's leadheroes.com, LEADHEROES.com.
Love it. Love it.
By the way, guys, I've got a little throwback on today.
Oh,
I don't know if you noticed that.
Little retro. Little retro.
Throwback. It is Tuesday.
Little what's the word that people use when they're reminiscing?
Nostalgia.
Thank you. Little nostalgia. Little nostalgia on today's pod. Man, you guys, do we have a topic for you guys today?
It's a big one.
Glenn, let's rewind to the beginning in case anybody isn't aware. It's amazing to me how many agents are completely just in the dark that there even was an FCC rule that was going to take effect yesterday originally, right?
Yeah.
So let's
tons of misinformation. Uninformed. There's a lot of you that were uninformed of what was going on, had no idea. A lot of you were misinformed. You had some completely crazy idea of what was going on that wasn't true. Some of you thought like TCPA was what was starting, which TCPA goes back to 1996. That's been around forever. The telephone. So it's been chaos. It's been a roller. It really feels like the Matterhorn at Disneyland. I can't stand that roller coaster. If you guys have been on it, it's like herky jerky. It's like that's what the FCC. Yeah, that's been the FCC for the past 2.5 years, roughly, with the rule changes.
So, okay, stop me if I miss anything in the timeline, right? Just catching people up.
Yeah, do it.
My first recollection of this, I want to say, was in AEP 2023 when they first were coming out with the proposal of the FCC rule. Kind of similar to like a CMS proposal, right? Before they put out a final rule, they put out a proposal.
It was like this, like December, January, right?
I remember we were in talks of merging.
Yeah.
When it came out, I remember those two things synonymously being connected in time.
Yeah.
And so now I don't quite remember actually when the rule actually dropped, but I want to say it was Q1 of 2024 with an effective date.
I think you're a year off.
Maybe.
I think the proposal was 2022. I think it was like December, January of 2022. CMS puts out this proposal that a lot of people were like, this is crazy. It'll never happen. And then final rule came out in like April of 2023, which was like, hey, this is happening. And then, so, and I was hearing about all of this coming to fruition back in like 2022.
Got it.
This has been a long time coming, this whole situation.
Okay. For some reason, it didn't actually hit my radar until much later, but
right.
Why would it, right? At that point, I wasn't in the lead gen game. So
it didn't actually change yet. Right. So a lot of people were like, hey, it hasn't changed yet. I'm not going to worry about this right now. So that was another big piece of this.
I remember hearing more details about it for the first time around the same time we were talking merger, which was Q4, basically 2023. Fast forward 2024, right, is when they actually dropped the rule with an effective date in 2025. Yep. Do I have that right so far?
Yeah, it was passed. The FCC passed the new rule change. It was very sneaky. It was around Thanksgiving of 2023, literally like Wednesday before Thanksgiving, when probably if you're really trying to slip something through, nobody's paying attention, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, hey, we're going to vote on this in a few weeks, Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And then it was like mid-December, they voted and passed this.
Got it.
And that's when they said, hey, you guys have 6 months. And, all hell broke loose, right? It was panic. Then at that point in time, as soon as it passed was when the legal fight started on this, you guys. A lot of you might think that this is something that just happened. This has been fought from the very beginning. They hear out the first I don't know what the official term on this, the attorneys that were essentially suing to try to say, hey, this is not legitimate. Like we can't have this. It's too big of a change. They hear out the first argument and they say, okay, we'll give you guys 12 months, but it's still happening. So then it went from 6 months to 12 months. That happened pretty quickly after the law changed. So and then it goes into effect. The rule gets published essentially like January 27th of 2024. And that's when they're like, okay, 12 months from now. So 12 months from what was supposed to be yesterday, which then ended up not happening.
So for anyone that might just be totally like in the dark about what the rule was going to put into motion, describe it, if you would, in layman's terms, about what the rule change was actually going to be.
There's a few smaller things that were a part of it, but the number one focus is one-to-one consent. And if you don't understand what that means, one-to-one consent is whoever you were working with when you opted in originally. I just talked about our lead heroes turning 65 leads. Those are built on affiliate partnerships. we aren't necessarily the one that captures that first opt-in. So compliantly utilizing affiliate partnerships at Lead Heroes, we're able to take an opt-in that someone else captured and then turn around and call them. So this rule that was supposed to take place was to essentially annihilate that whole process. To say, hey, whoever, if you capture that opt-in, you have to be the one to contact them, the end user, to sell them. It has to be one company all the way through. You can't have any type of, and the CMS final rule took this even further, trying to define what a TPMO is, which gets really crazy on the Medicare side because you have someone who could be a downline agent who's technically a different entity, but then you have the upline who's generating the lead, and they can't necessarily service that lead that they generate, and they're trying to pass that person along to their downline agent. The whole, almost the whole IMO, FMO model is built on a company doing marketing and helping, either, giving it for free, they're making money on the contracts, or some sort of discounted model. So just annihilated how traditional marketing was supposed to work, right? This one-to-one consent idea.
And a lot of lead vendors too, right? A lot of lead vendors, it just would completely crush their current model of how they were doing things, right? Because you think about a lead vendor, right? A lead vendor does marketing under some generic name, right? Say, Senior Solutions of America or something, right? They get people to opt in, whether it be online, a landing page, direct mail card, whatever, right? And they give it off to the agent. The agent calls them. They've agreed for a licensed person to call them, right? So that previously would have made it compliant, or currently.
Correct.
The one-to-one consent would make it to where, technically speaking, right, for that opt-in to be compliant, they'd have to be opting in to speak to Glen Shelton or little Billy down the street.
Little Billy. Little Johnny. Susan Senior and little Johnny.
Yes. Which throws a monkey wrench into a lot of different marketing. Now, I think there was workarounds with it, right? I think we had come up with a pretty good strategy in terms of, working around it and still being able to offer marketing to agents. But regardless, it would make the cost of marketing rise, right?
Yes. So this is a key part in the story. And I do want to mention too, and I posted this earlier before we went live. A lot of people think because this got thrown out after Donald Trump got elected, that like Trump came in and like kiboshed it, or like some big change at the FCC happened, and that's what rolled this back. My understanding of what happened is that the new administration played essentially zero factor into this being thrown out. That this was thrown out based on oral arguments in the 11th Circuit Court, which I believe is in Atlanta. Essentially, the lawyer that had been fighting this from the beginning kept submitting written documents. 5 judges, there were, 3 is a majority on this. 3 judges kept saying, no, like, we're not, like, this needs to happen. And then he finally got granted oral arguments, so he got to actually go in there and have a legit say in what's going on. And the number one point that he argued was what Christian just said, you guys, was the increase in cost of marketing. Now, I want to talk about a podcast we did last week. We were talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. On paper, the Inflation Reduction Act looks great. Just like on paper, communism looks great. Socialism looks great, right? The Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of unintended consequences that even Christian mentioned he saw coming a mile away, because these for-profit entities, they have to have that money come from somewhere, right? So on the surface, one-to-one consent sounds great. I opt into ESI, Everything Senior Insurance. Christian from Everything Senior Insurance calls me. I knew exactly who was supposed to call me because when I opted in originally, I knew who it was. Everybody's happy, right? The unintended consequence of that increase in marketing, though, as a for-profit company that Christian's running, means that that money has to come from somewhere. And as a consumer, this would have most likely literally created inflation, because you're talking about not just the insurance world that's dealing with this, you're talking about national marketing for all products and services. So if you're a for-profit business and now your cost to acquire a client just doubled, what are you going to do? Where you're going to increase the cost of your goods or services.
Passes
right?
down to the consumer, right?
Passes down to the consumer. That
Yeah.
was it. That's what annihilated this, is an attorney successfully argued to these judges who had slammed down this argument of trying to throw this out. They were like, no, this needs to happen. This is a good thing for the consumer. No, 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 no. And the attorney said, if this goes through, you are going to see an increase in the cost of goods and services across the board for everyone in America, and it will literally cause inflation. Which again, it's just basic math. If I'm selling a car, if I'm selling a car, and to get that car sold, it cost me double what it did yesterday, I have to roll that cost into the car, right? And that would have happened everywhere. That's what happened.
Yeah. It's so interesting, the turn of events, because despite us doing this podcast, there will be a lot of people that don't see this podcast. Not that many. Lots of people are watching. But there will be lots of people that don't get the memo, because around the same time, right, literally days before it, Trump does an executive order, not specifically about this rule, but urging some of these government agencies to basically postpone rulings that they've done under the last administration, so that they could, basically go through and determine what should really stick and what shouldn't, kind of thing, right? So, but it sounds like this has this specific turn of events, while interesting timing of it all, really had nothing to do with that. This had been kind of building up and going on in the courts this entire time.
Yes. This was a domino effect over time. And honestly, it's a miracle. There's so many people, I posted about this on Friday. This was like the absolute last minute that this could have gotten thrown out. It got thrown out. It was why I had no expectation of this being thrown out. Christian mentioned we already had plans in place on how we can compliantly navigate this. I have seen a lot of lead vendors, data companies that basically were preparing to close their doors, who are probably throwing them back open, grand reopening type situations. But this was an 11th hour decision that tossed this FCC one-to-one consent. A lot of people, when I posted about this, they thought it was horrible for the consumer. A lot of people said this was just Trump doing Trump things. So again, so much misinformation surrounding this. And again, fake news. Fake news. Exactly. I'm all about the end user. If you've ever listened to any content that Christian and I have done, I always talk about, the Medicare benefit. How is this going to affect the Medicare beneficiary? I think that's the most important when it comes to any new rule or regulation. That's what should be the focus. Shouldn't be about necessarily policing the marketing or policing the sales. It should be, how is this going to affect the end user? How is this going to affect the Medicare beneficiary? And I think they got it right. I think they absolutely got it right on throwing this out. And it's not just vacated for a year. Christian in the title here said push back to 2026.
Yes.
My understanding is that for this to
totally
come back, for this to come back in 2026, it would essentially have to get rewritten, that it couldn't come back as it was. So not that this can't come back in the future, some variation of it could, but the rule that was written and voted on and was supposed to be implemented yesterday, that specific rule is gone.
Got it. So let me rewind just a little bit and let's unpack some things on this.
Let's do it.
Because man, is there a lot to talk about related to this.
Yeah.
Let's dissect it a little bit, right? So the argument of someone watching that might have been, the type of person that's in the comments that they're like, this is bad for the consumer, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Their argument, I would imagine, would be, in our current landscape, if someone fills out, let's say, an online opt-in form, I want information about hats, right? That
Just thinking
opt-in,
about that hat company you want to start.
Well, never say never.
Yeah.
But I want information about hats, let's say.
Yes.
My opt-in under the current rules, right, can be passed on as many times as possible, and I might get flooded with phone calls for years telling me about this hat. I have a pink hat. I have a gold hat. I have all, there's hats coming at me from all directions, right?
It might not even be about hats. Someone
Sure.
might buy that opt-in, and they might call you about a car warranty.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Legally, compliantly.
So that's probably the argument of the individual that's saying this is bad for the end user. To unpack and go and let's dig into the details a little bit on why this overall being thrown out is a good thing for everyone. Let's dive into that.
The number one piece of what's good for you as a consumer here in America that this got thrown out is that the cost of acquisition for you to buy something through marketing and advertising would have gone up significantly.
Yes.
And that as a for-profit business, you would have had to increase your goods and services. None of us want spam calls. None of us want, to opt in for a hat and get a call about a car warranty. Obviously, that can be frustrating, right? The other interesting piece of this, though, is that, we talked about that roller coaster effect of like, we're going to change. Oh, we're not going to change. The industry did not think this was going to be thrown out. This wasn't something that was expected. Most businesses have revolutionized their internal process because of this one-to-one consent. I'm fascinated about where we're at right now and what is going to happen moving forward. The tug and pull of the free market. What will win? Will the lower CPA, and are we going back to this traditional model of, I captured this opt-in, I'm going to sell it to 100 affiliates. They're going to call about their offers. It's compliant and legal. It might frustrate some consumers. Are we going to go back to that? Or is the free market going to choose and say, your CPA is higher, but this is actually a higher quality lead. So, I think you're going to like this more. And I'm fascinated in that tug and pull of where we're going to end up and what is ultimately better for the consumer,
Yeah. I always think whatever process is best for the consumer is probably what ends up being the best lead too, right? Like if it's a process where, like we talked about this on this podcast multiple times about old school lead vendors when we first got into it, that you'd buy a lead, they tell you that they're sharing it with 4 or 5 agents, so they were shared, but they're really sharing it with like 50, right?
Right.
But like that's what they tell you. That's a bad overall, I guess, experience for the consumer. I think everyone can agree on that, right? There's 50 agents calling you all at once. Your phone's about to explode. It's shaking.
Right.
Buttons are flying off. You don't really have buttons, I guess, anymore on phones, but
your virtual buttons are about
your
to
virtual
explode.
buttons are flying off.
Yeah.
That also probably warrants. I think the two are connected, right? Like the better experience it is for the consumer, the better lead it probably is for the agent as well. And that's probably where we get to a point where free market ends up determining what wins and what doesn't win. Because if it's a bad experience for the consumer, the agent that's buying the lead is going to feel that, and they're probably not going to reorder. Is that
True.
a good way to look at all this? Like the free market will end up determining what wins and what doesn't win versus government trying to control and manipulate every aspect of this and policing it. This episode of the Seven Figures or Bust podcast is brought to you by the Seven Figure Medicare Agent Summit. Guys, it is a fact that getting around other people that are chasing the same ambitions and destinations in their business as you is a great thing, and it can propel your business years ahead than not getting around people and networking and going to live events. The Seven Figure Medicare Agent Summit is the premier event. Every year we hear year after year after year that it is the event that has the best content. So many events nowadays, they do a lot of pitching from the stage. They're really just there to sell you things. And if nothing more than that, they're just a bunch of vendors put together and they're just nothing but networking. There's no content. The summit is the best of both worlds, you guys. The summit puts together great, fantastic speakers from all ends of the industry, and also get you in a room with like-minded individuals from all over the country that are trying to build their business just like you. The summit this year is taking place in Salt Lake City from June 22nd to 24th at the Hilton Hotel. We still have tickets available. We'd love to have you come out for the event. We are over 50% sold out at the time of recording this, but get your ticket now while you can. This event will sell out, and we'd love to see you there in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, there's some interesting, and like there's so many conversations that I've had privately, that Christian and I have had privately about this rule with partners, with call centers. It's crazy. Again, kind of the back and forth. What I can tell you too is that a lot of people claim they had it figured out. They didn't. There's a lot of conversations of, we're going to have to test this and kind of see what happens. We'll have to see what's going on by the time AEP rolls around, those types of conversations. But one thing in particular that's really interesting, especially from the call center standpoint, is, there's CPA, which we talk about a lot, cost per acquisition. How much does it actually cost you to get that client? But then there's this other metric of your agent's time, whether it's a W-2 LOA agent or you're an independent agent. If, door knocking is a $0 CPA, right? That's a marketing strategy, right? Not saying go door knock for Medicare Advantage, but you could door knock for final expense, Medicare supplement, but your cost of time is extremely high. So CPA is like one metric you have to look at, but the other metric is like, especially if you're a call center owner and you've got these people you're paying payroll to and they're sitting in the call center or they're sitting at home, it's a remote call center. How much time are they spending to acquire that client? So that again kind of comes back to this tug and pull of, it's not even just about how low of a cost it is, but it's also about how efficient your agent's time is being used. You might be willing to absorb a higher CPA if it means they're writing twice as many policies that day.
Yeah. Let's talk about the CMS side of this also, right? Because that's the question, that there's so many Medicare agents that are, going to hear this, follow us, everything like that. Obviously, CMS puts out final rule. A huge amount of aspects of final rule are still never have seen the light of day because they're still being tied up in court. Who knows what happens there? Maybe that just gets thrown out as well. Wouldn't surprise me at this point.
Yeah.
But as of right now, CMS in final rule, right, adopted a lot of aspects of this FCC one-to-one consent rule, right? And supposedly went into effect 10/1. What do you feel like that means for that? So CMS has this own rule, and then the FCC has their own. Like, you see there being a lot of confusion and conflict there. I just don't see that long-term and being the way things are going to be. But what are your thoughts on the Medicare side of things, the CMS side?
Great point. And what we learned last year, you guys, when CMS put out that final rule before the FCC rule went into effect, what we learned is that technically the FCC is the overarching, they kind of get final say on anything that gets communicated here stateside, right? Federal Communications Commission, anything, any marketing, any advertising that's being sent or publicized, like the FCC has final say on it, but CMS has final say on communications with seniors. So there is this like butting of heads, and this goes back to 2022 for me. Before any of this, I'm starting to hear whispers, through my network, and I'm being told that CMS was trying to push this through, and the FCC apparently behind the scenes was like, you can't do that. You need to wait for us. And so there was this weird back and forth that, from my understanding, was happening behind the scenes before any of this even came to fruition. And then the CMS was technically going to put their rule in place before the FCC rule. And then there's the stay that got put on final rule. So what a just mess of, right? I mean, just explaining it sounds so messy, but I believe
I have a headache after listening to that.
I know I need a drink just hearing myself talk about this, but I do believe that with the new administration, they're going to come in and mirror what the FCC has already decided. I don't understand how the CMS, especially with this new admin coming in, I don't understand how they could come in and be like, hey, I don't care what the FCC says, we're rolling with this. I would be shocked by that.
Me too.
Most likely.
Me too.
And what I'm hearing from partners in really high up places, you guys, is that we're back. We are back to the traditional model of, this affiliate model of, yes, you get this opt-in as long as it's within 90 days, according to TCPA, which, again, TCPA compliance says, as long as this opt-in came within the last 90 days, you can compliantly reach out to them. So we're back. We're back, baby.
It's a big deal. So
it's a huge deal.
With it being basically, I know the reporting of it has been that it's been postponed, but with this basically being thrown out, what's the likelihood that we see another rule come 2026 that's just completely rewritten from scratch? If you had to look into your crystal ball.
I think I've been cautiously optimistic heading into this year of deregulation. The government that we currently have in place, I would be shocked to see them scrambling to try to put forth a new rule. I'm sure there are people in the government who are very upset that this rule got thrown out. And again, I understand on paper, it sounds great. It sounds like you're protecting consumers by having this one-to-one consent relationship. But I think there's so much more, the economy is much more complex than just a one-to-one consent relationship. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act is such a great thing to point to that just recently happened, you guys, where it derailed a lot of benefits on these Medicare plans because they were trying to cap prescription drug costs. So this unintended consequence based on something that sounded great.
Yeah.
What do you think, though? You tell me. What do you see something like this coming to fruition in the future?
I think with our current, I think, like you said, I think with our current government that we have right now, I think if we had our last administration, I think they'd find a way.
Yeah.
But I think with this current administration, I think their priorities are on deregulation, free market, and letting business boom. I think that's where their priorities are at. And so I think this decision is good for business. Yeah. And I think that's what their priorities are. And I think, they want to build the economy, right? They want the economy to thrive. That can't happen without business being able to business. You like that?
Put it on a shirt, baby.
And so
being able to business.
And so, yeah, I would be utterly shocked. And I think we're going to see, the proposal we saw from CMS Q4 of last year during AEP. I don't think that sees the light of day.
No way.
I think the final rule right now, I think
Vacated.
give it 90 days. And I think that thing's gone, baby.
Obliterated.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's, and I think we're in this area right now where, like Glenn said, we are in a place where there's now contradictions. There's CMS and FCC contradictions. Who do you follow? Who's right? Who's wrong? FCC has the real authority on these things, right? On all types of communications in that way, right? They are big brother in that type of ruling and regulation. So, we're in such a gray area right now, but I think we're moving towards this deregulation, and I think it's going to be a really, really good next 4 years to grow your business, you guys. Oh my God. This is an opportunity that you might never get again to grow your business.
Yeah.
That's what I would be thinking about with all this. Like if there's something you walk away from this, like what does it mean? It means get your shit together, son, because it's time to grow. It's time to grow. Not that it's ever not time to grow, but man, is it really time to grow? It's time to really go after it.
I think the writing on the wall from the last 4 years is that things can change that are completely out of our control. Something like a one-payer system here in the United States could happen at some point. It's possible. I'm not saying it could never, ever happen. It is possible that someone super progressive gets into office. They run on this. It's one of their core achievements that they're trying to do. And all of a sudden, our landscape changes overnight. That's possible. But what we do know is that the next 4 years are going to be nothing but the opposite of that, where we should be heading into deregulation, more free market opportunities. I mean, I would love to see stuff like the 48-hour rule thrown out. Again, as the end user, the Medicare beneficiary, I don't see how they benefit from the cool down period. I think that should be tossed. I'm hoping that, if you're listening to this and you're not watching, I'm talking to Dr. Oz behind me. I'm hoping he comes in and really takes out some of these rules that agents have had to deal with that haven't benefited anybody, that
and
just sounded good.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sounds good. The 48-hour scope of appointment rule, in my eyes, is it's on the Mount Rushmore of dumbest things the government has ever passed. Makes no sense, helps no one, does nothing, literally nothing.
Yeah.
I would argue it hurts the consumer as much as it hurts the agent, right?
100%.
Because for me as a consumer, Glenn can attest to this, I want to get shit done. I want to get things over with, and I want to move on to the next
Christian's
thing.
not waiting for it.
I don't want to wait. So if I'm a consumer and I'm told, okay, sign this, and then let's talk again in 2 days, I'm going to be like, what? Like,
Christian would hold that agent at gunpoint and be like, "You are writing the policy right now." That would be the mentality.
And I'd probably be that senior where I'm like, I'm just going to call in somewhere and sign up myself if you can't do it right now. Like, I'm not dealing with this again in 2 days. You know what I mean? Like,
yep.
And so I've been consistently saying that for years, that rule just doesn't help anyone. I say that to say, you look at the first administration of this administration, and that is one of the major highlights of what deregulation looked like in the Medicare space. That rule got thrown in the garbage. And I know Nehru came in and took credit for it and everything like that, but I think it might have happened regardless of them. Maybe not. Maybe they had a serious hand in that. But I found it interesting how, they took credit for it when it happened. And then when it came back, they were like, oh, we couldn't do anything. Sorry. You know what I
What?
mean?
Yeah, I think this is a good, as we get towards the top of the hour here, maybe this is a good thing we can speculate on. We're known to speculate on this show, you guys. Um, maybe we could
God
speculate about
forbid.
maybe we could speculate about some rules we'd either like to see thrown out or we think could be thrown out, whether that's outside of the CMS or specifically pertaining to CMS. I think the 48-hour rule is a low-hanging fruit. We've already seen it come and go and then get brought back. What's another one you think that either needs to go or you think should go?
I would go even one step farther on the scope of appointment. I would just get rid of the scope of appointment. If I was CMS, in charge of CMS tomorrow, that there would be no scope of appointment. I'd be like, and my argument to the CMS board would be, I'd be like, listen, you guys, I'd be like, I know all you guys do all day is sharpen your pencils and write rules, but
You're such a bully.
but what does this actually
Listen
do?
up, nerds. Listen up, nerds. Let me tell you what's really happening out there.
Dad is here. Daddy is here. But no, I would completely have that form eradicated because I've said it for years. It's something that my dad said when I first started in the business, and I thought he said it well, so I've repeated it many times over the years. But in this country, you can buy a house, you can buy a car, you can buy all kinds of things. You don't need to sign a scope of appointment document, but to buy a Medicare Advantage plan, you do, and or a PDP. You know what I mean? Like it's asinine, it's outrageous, and it's the only people that think it's a good idea are, people that sharpen pencils and don't do anything all day, except, other than try to think about, will this piece of paper and having people sign it 2 days out, like, is that going to stop fraud or anything like that? No. I think people that commit fraud are going to worry about your 48-hour scope of appointment rule? No. They're breaking way more serious rules and laws than that. The only people that get affected are people that try to do things the right way and the consumer.
Like when Zuckerberg was like in front of Congress and just like they're just like throwing questions at him, he's just like sweating and just I want to see you. I want to see you on the panel, and you're just like tearing these senators apart. You're just like, you have no idea what's happening. Yeah. When did you write a Medicare policy last? You're just like, you're just cutting them in half. I'm going to take a different approach here. So instead of removing a rule, I'm going to tell you a rule that I think should be expanded. So this is a little different, but I was just thinking about this as you were talking. Something that I've always loved early on is the birthday rule. Not every state has adopted this. I would love to see a national birthday rule. I'd love to see CMS do this at the federal level and say, hey, you have a guaranteed issue opportunity to switch plans within 30 days of your birthday. I would love to move towards this for several reasons. One is I think all of the stress that goes into AEP, not saying we want to do like year-round open enrollment. I understand that can be problematic. We see it in some of the states that do that. But if we had like a national birthday rule, maybe that would take some of the stress off of everyone scrambling to change their plan, once a year. Maybe by being able to help people around their birthday, which again, there's more and more states have been adopting this. There's probably, I don't know what the number is right now off the top of my head. There's probably 15 states now that have a birthday rule or an anniversary rule. For like Missouri as an example, where they can switch within like 30 days on either side of their birthday.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing more tragic to me than someone that's either on a Medicare supplement plan, they've been on it a long time, and their rates have just ballooned through the roof.
Yeah.
And they can't pass underwriting, and they can't afford to not have that med sup at the same time. Right.
Right.
That is
tragic.
A horrifying no-win situation for the consumer.
Yep.
And, I think having a national birthday rule, definitely, it provides additional options, which I'm always in favor of when it comes to Medicare beneficiaries. I think that would be a very interesting one. One thing you see in a lot of birthday rule states is lower MedSup commission and higher MedSup rates. So that would be the negative downfall of that. But at the same time, right? Like, you look at some birthday rule states, the MedSup commissions might be higher, but and some states are different, right? Not every state is going to apply
but it's very state by state for sure.
Yeah, but some states it's just maybe slightly higher than a non-birthday rule state, that kind of thing. It's certainly not a perfect thing, but I think I'd rather. I mean, because I do believe long-term MedSup rates are ballooning anyway, right? They're going to continue to balloon. They're going to continue to inflate. I think it's a nice option for seniors to have that across the nation. I like it.
Jason commented, and guys, comment below if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns about today's stream. You also, by commenting, automatically get entered into our Freebie Friday, where we pick one or sometimes multiple people, and we give away something. Last Friday, we gave away turning 65 leads. I'm not sure yet what we're giving away this coming Friday. But Jason commented, again, the law of unintended consequences, which has been kind of a theme of today's podcast, and we've talked a lot about, is that increase in birthday rule. And you are right, Jason, and Christian just touched on it too. I remember here in Oregon when birthday rule went into effect, the premiums exploded. It was like a 20 to 30% jump across the board. But the interesting thing is, I feel like Oregon kind of evened out. There was this initial huge jump because they have to essentially price it in, right? They have to price it in. But once it got priced in, I don't think it was as big of a deal. So yeah, it's a give and take, but just a random idea. Any other thoughts you have, Christian, regarding rule changes that you'd get rid of, or maybe new rules? Maybe there's a new rule you'd want to implement.
I'm not one of that's usually a fan of rules.
As King Christian, maybe you want to put a new rule out there.
Well, the first rule I would enact as Lord and Governor of Medicare, if I was so fortunate to be deemed as such, is you will be imprisoned for taking one of our clients. That would be thrown in jail. No, I'm just kidding. And not one of our jails, a jail in Mexico. Yeah. We would send you down to Mexico.
You're going to Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay for stealing one of our Medicare beneficiaries from our
if
clients.
We get evidence of this.
I love it. it.
No. In all seriousness, no. I think some rules that I would probably, I think I would put some more emphasis, I would say, on Medicare supplement oversight, right? And what I mean by that is, it's kind of a weird thing to where Medicare Advantage and PDPs, Part D prescription drug plans, are so ruled over by CMS, and MedSups are regulated by the states, right? Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing, but it does kind of create a situation where your Department of Insurance can feel a certain way about something in one state, and a Department of Insurance can feel another way about another, in another state about the same thing that I've seen before. Like one that jumps out to me is like, we're licensed in Louisiana.
Yep.
That Department of Insurance is on the warpath all the time. I'm getting emails constantly. They're like, you know what I mean? Like, and there's got to be a way where there's just some kind of blanket
symmetry, right?
Yeah. I find that would probably be a good thing, but at the same time, I wouldn't want it to be. I would hesitate to even enact that rule because I wouldn't want it to evolve and mutate into Medicare Advantage 2.0 type of regulations either. But that's one. I mean, I would probably be most in favor of pulling rules away because I think we have a ton of rules that absolutely make no sense.
I was thinking this almost the same thing, but with the large, if like the national carriers, the really big carriers, it's so frustrating to see how they'll all roll out their interpretation of the rules differently, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, do I adhere to what Humana said, or do I adhere to what United Healthcare said? Well, Cigna said this. It'd be nice to like form like a council. It's like a Jedi council of like the biggest carriers, and they roll out that update arm locked together. They're like, hey, we came together, we talked about it. Because again, I think that symmetry might make doing business easier for agents.
Yeah.
But I also don't like the idea of necessarily forcing. Gets a little weird at that point. Like forcing these businesses to work together when they're technically competitors. So I don't know how that would play into it. But someone said no more call recordings. I think at a bare minimum, the call recordings should be limited. The idea that every single call needs to be recorded is insane. I think enrollment calls need to be recorded maybe, but there's no reason for every single call to be recorded. If you're calling up Susie to say happy birthday,
Yeah.
that's wild.
Agreed. And right now that is the rule where it's just enrollment calls that need to be recorded.
Some carriers at the time interpreted it. They freaked out. They were like, record everything. Record everything. Yeah.
That was crazy.
Yes.
And really in a way, like CMS likes to say that they put clarification on it, but the way they put out the ruling, I don't think they left any interpretation for it to be just enrollment calls. I think they kind of backed off on that the following year, and so that was a positive thing that they did, one of few. But I think, my thoughts on the call recordings is I don't think it should be a requirement for an agent, but I do think if you are an agent, whether it's a requirement or not, you should do it regardless because documentation protects you. So I'm a little more on the fence on that one. I can see the argument towards not making it a requirement, but I do think it's a good practice regardless, right? So like my thought process when that came out was like, we were already recording our calls.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, we're already doing this. You know what I mean? Like, because there's no better way to protect yourself if you have that type of documentation. If somebody provides an allegation, I think the positive side of it is like, if you have an allegation and you have to send in the call recording, there might be something totally unrelated that maybe you misspoke on that call that has nothing to do with their allegation. Then they're like, aha, I don't like that. I don't like that part of it. So maybe not making it a requirement, maybe not including it in allegations might be probably not the worst thing.
Well, we are almost at the top of the hour, you guys. Appreciate everyone who's joined us and already listened to this entire stream, this entire podcast. Christian, final thoughts on today's episode regarding the FCC One-to-One Consent Rule being obliterated. What do you think? Final thoughts.
My final thoughts are, I think it's a great thing. I think that less regulation is good for business, and I think it's good for our economy. I think it's good for our country. And I think, for the people that argue that more regulation is good, I think it's one of those things that we've talked about many times on this show and past podcasts, that it's good in theory, but typically the rules that come as a result of it make no sense and they're stupid and they don't actually fix anything and they just make life harder for everyone. That's government 101, right? Not fixing things, making things harder, and creating new problems without fixing any of the old problems. So I think just because of the government's incapability, to be able to actually resolve these problems, I'm overwhelmingly in favor of less regulation. I'm a free market capitalist, and so I'm ecstatic. I'm overjoyed. I love that that's happened.
Absolutely echo everything that Christian just said for my final thoughts. I think this was a huge win. If one-to-one consent's better for everybody, let's let the free market decide that. I don't need the court systems to tell me what's best for the consumer or what's best for the economy. Let's let the free market decide that, and it's going to be interesting to see, how the next 12 months play out now that there's been this huge ethos around one-to-one consent, and some people already switched. Some people are switching back. Some people were about to close their doors. They're opening them back up. It's going to be very interesting to see how the market adjusts moving forward in 2025. But yes, those are my final thoughts. Very excited. This was a win for the free market, for capitalism, for business, for sure.
Guys, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of episode 45 of the 7 Figures or Bust podcast. If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you are listening to us on. Make sure that you leave us a 5-star review on platforms such as Apple Podcasts. We would certainly appreciate that. And we'll see you guys on the next episode. Here's to your guys' success and wishing you massive success going into 2025. Thanks, everybody.